Hello, lovers of science, and welcome back to General Science. We're going to be wrapping up our geology experience here by talking about earthquakes, and then we'll be moving on to the more environmental side of the earth sciences to wrap up the series. So today we're going to be talking about earthquakes and kind of what causes them, and then why that happens, really. So that's what we'll be talking about. So to get started, earthquakes are really just when tectonic plates underneath us move suddenly. So anytime a tectonic plate moves quickly, or if there's any type of seismic activity underneath us, so this could happen near like a volcano as well, right? There's a big shift underneath the earth, an earthquake happens. And these tectonic plates move all the time, but earthquakes happen when the plates slide quickly past each other. So it's not going to happen every time a plate moves, but it is going to happen every time it moves quickly. So for instance, if the plates are like this and they move really quickly, right, that's when there could be an earthquake. And so they can be kind of a scary experience for those of you who live through them. I know maybe some of you who watch this have been in around an earthquake before, so you kind of know what the deal is. But for those of us who haven't, it's kind of terrifying for the ground to shake underneath you all of a sudden. It's not an exciting not an exciting prospect. Um, so um, Earthquakes most often happen at plate boundaries. So those are the places where they are most likely to occur. It doesn't mean that that's always where they occur, but it is definitely those are the places where they are the most often going to occur. And since there are three different types of plate boundaries, and there are plate boundaries all over the place, right? That's where you're going to be experiencing earthquakes. So at the three different types of boundaries, which we talked about a couple of videos ago, we have convergent plate boundaries, divergent plate boundaries, and transform boundaries. At convergent boundaries, this is where plates are colliding with each other, and that can obviously cause earthquakes when they push into each other, right? So that's where how those are going to happen at convergent plate boundaries, or if they shift suddenly while they're running into each other. Divergent plate boundaries, this is when the two plates go away from each other. And this creates volcanic activity, and that can, of course, also create earthquakes because of the shifts in magma underneath the surface of the planet. And then finally, transform plate boundaries are when two plates slide against each other. And that's what happens in like the San Francisco, California area. That's a transform boundary, and that's when plates are sliding across each other like this. And so what happens is they get stuck, and then they get pushed and pushed and pushed, and then they go. And so that causes a lot of earthquakes. So if you remember all of the tectonic plate boundaries that I've shown you in the last couple of videos, they're mostly on the edges of continents, but the one spot where there's the most earthquake activity is going to be in that ring of fire area, which is in the Pacific Ocean. And that also has a lot of other issues with that, since earthquakes can then trigger tsunamis and tidal waves and stuff like that. So the Ring of Fire is where the most earthquake activity is, and it has a big effect on the Pacific Islands, Japan, South America, Alaska, all those places that can get hit with those large waves of water because of these earthquakes. So that's kind of the place that we have spent the most time and energy into monitoring earthquake activity, because there's just so many lives there that can be affected by these things. And so we have a pretty elaborate detection system that we've developed to try to prepare and predict when these tremors and seismic activity will occur so that we can prepare and keep people safe, especially because some of the areas over here, right, are a little bit less developed and they don't have the same kind of infrastructure that other countries have to defend themselves against these kinds of natural disasters. So let's talk about some of our biggest kinds of earthquakes that have happened in history. The first one we'll talk about is the Cusco earthquake, which happened in 1650. and it killed 5,000 people, and it lasted for 15 minutes. So if you imagine the ground shaking for that long, it caused mudslides and building collapses, and the groundwater was disturbed, which is what they drank out of. And Cusco is kind of a mountain city, so it got a lot of damage to it. That was all the way back in 1650, and we know about this only because at this point the Spanish were there, and so they registered this in their analogs. So that's why we know about that one. The San Francisco earthquakes, there's been a lot of them, but the one in 1906 was particularly bad. Started at 5 in the morning, and it could be felt all the way across California. And there was 3,000 deaths, and 80% of the city was toppled by this earthquake. So a lot of destruction in that one. The earthquake in Haiti in 2010, which you may remember if you're a little bit older, was really damaging. There were 52 aftershocks after the initial quake, which is another part of earthquakes. The earth might continue to shake after the original earthquake. And we're not actually sure how many people died, but it's estimated that anywhere between 100,000 to 160,000 people died during the earthquakes. And that's mostly because Haiti is rather poor, and so they didn't have the infrastructure and the supplies and the help to find people who are trapped and stuff like that. So earthquakes have a kind of a higher impact on impoverished areas of the world. And then finally, in 2011, the last one we'll talk about, there was an earthquake off the coast of Japan, and it caused some pretty large tsunamis, and it was the 4th largest earthquake we've ever recorded since we started recording them. And this earthquake also caused the meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, so the damage has really affected that area of Japan. We're still cleaning up nuclear waste from the ocean and from the ground there. And it was kind of a nasty thing to have happen. It's just an unfortunate spot to have an earthquake when we have something as dangerous as a nuclear power plant nearby. So before we end, though, we do want to talk about one other type of earthquake, which is a little bit different than our natural plate occurring ones, which are earthquakes that have been caused by fracking. What is fracking? Well, fracking is a well stimulation technique that's been used in the United States recently, where we inject a pressurized liquid into a gas well and hopefully creates cracks in the bedrock, which allows gas and petroleum to flow more freely into the gas well. Why is that an issue? Well, what you're doing is you're breaking up the structure of the continental plates we're sitting on. And so this fracturing of our plates is causing increased seismic activity in areas where earthquakes aren't common. We're talking about places like Oklahoma in the middle of a continental plate that are now experiencing earthquakes because we've broken up the continental crust underneath the state. So that's a big issue, that we're having these earthquakes in places we shouldn't be having them. The other bad thing about fracking in general, other than the fact that it's causing earthquakes, is that it's also contaminating drinking water with bedrock and petroleum products. So imagine drinking basically gasoline, like raw gasoline, instead of water. So fixing this has now become a major health concern, not just for, dealing with earthquake and earthquake safety, having to build buildings up to a higher standard of code in these areas now because of the seismic activity in the area, but also because we're polluting the groundwater in this way. So not great on either sense of the term. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video about earthquakes. Next time we'll be heading into environmental science to finish off general science, and we'll be starting with the water cycle. So we'll be learning a little bit about that, and we'll go from there. Thank you guys once again for watching, and I'm very excited to finish this series off so that you can learn more about science. Adios. See you next time.